My name is Olga Reyes. I'm 27 years old. And this is the story of how cancer didn't break me, but my fiancé did. And how I walked into his wedding, not with vengeance in my voice, but survival in my dress. It started with a tightness in my chest. Nothing dramatic, just a dull ache I chalked up to bad posture and too much late-night coffee while rushing freelance deadlines. But it didn't go away. Then came the lump. The one I told myself was probably hormonal. Until it wasn't. I still remember the way Dr. Carter sat down across from me, his white coat still and heavy, his eyes carrying something he hadn't said out loud yet. "Olga," he said gently, "you have stage 3 breast cancer." And just like that, the world folded in on itself. I didn't cry. Not then. I think I was too stunned to feel. I just sat there, nodding, as he talked about options, chemo cycles, radiation schedules, percentages. But none of that felt real. What did feel real was the cold linoleum floor under my boots as I walked out of the hospital alone and dialed Jason. Jason, my fiancé. My partner of 4.5 years. The man who said, "We'll get through anything together." When he answered, his voice cracked. "I'm here. No matter what." And for a while, I believed that. Believed him. 3 weeks into treatment, I was a shell of the woman I used to be. I was curled on the bathroom floor one night, my stomach turning inside out, sweat clinging to my scalp, and every joint throbbing. I heard Jason's footsteps and whispered his name. He didn't respond right away. Then I heard him say it. "I can't do this anymore." I lifted my head, dizzy and barely able to process. This, meaning what? He wouldn't meet my eyes. The sickness. The hospital visits. Watching you like this. I thought I could handle it. But I can't. I called your sister. Emily's coming to stay. My voice cracked as I asked, "You told my sister before telling me?" Jason didn't even flinch. Just turned around and said, "I'll have someone pick up the rest of my stuff. I need space to think." And then he left. He left me lying on the cold tile, shaking and alone, like I was an expired item he no longer wanted to carry in his cart. The click of the door behind him sounded more final than any breakup could ever be. I didn't scream. Didn't even cry. My body didn't have the energy for that. But what came next broke me. 3 days later, while I was still too weak to sit up without help, I saw his name pop up on Instagram. Smiling. Laughing. Arm wrapped around Lindsay Parker, his coworker. Her red lipstick too bright. Her hand too familiar on his thigh. I zoomed in on the photo and stared at the timestamp. That same night he walked out on me, Jason was sipping wine on a rooftop bar with another woman. A woman who used to nod politely at me at office parties. Who once asked about my mother with fake concern in her voice. I didn't know what stung more, his betrayal or the fact that I still loved the version of him I once knew. Emily arrived that evening. I hadn't told her everything yet, but she took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. She brought soup. Sat beside me on the bed. And when I finally whispered the truth, she didn't say "I'm sorry." She just squeezed my hand and said, "I know about Lindsay." I stared. "You do?" "My friend works in the same building." She saw them together. A lot. Way before you were diagnosed. It was like someone had flipped a switch. My world didn't just crumble because of cancer, it had already been crumbling long before, behind my back, one lunch date and fake smile at a time. The next morning, I got another knock on the door. Jason's mother, Judith. She stood there with a bouquet of pale hydrangeas, and I didn't know whether to slam the door or collapse into her arms. "I know what he did," she said. "It was wrong. All of it." She pulled out an envelope. "This is the money I'd saved for his wedding. I don't want her walking down the aisle in a dress paid for with this. Use it for yourself." For something good. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Later that night, I got a DM from Melanie, a college friend who worked with Jason years ago. Her message still echoes in my mind. He told people your illness was the perfect out. That he could leave without looking like the bad guy. That sentence burned into my brain like acid. I was his cover story. His shield from judgment. He used my pain as camouflage for his selfishness. That's when something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in resolve. I stopped lying on the bathroom floor. I started walking again. Slowly. I got a recovery coach. I changed my diet. I made myself tea, even when my hands shook too much to lift the cup. I emailed old contacts and took small freelance jobs again, editing children's books from bed. Bit by bit, I climbed back. And that's when the wedding invitation came. Not to me directly, of course. But forwarded by a mutual friend. A digital flyer dripping with syrupy love story lines. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Jason Miller and Lindsay Parker at the Atoria Edge Hotel, where our love began. My breath caught. Atoria Edge. The same venue Jason and I had once reserved. The same flowers. The same chairs. The same band. He had taken everything I planned for our day and handed it to someone else. But this time, he didn't know who he was dealing with. I stared at the wedding invitation until my screen dimmed from inactivity. Then I picked up my phone, called my sister, and said 6 words that sealed everything in motion. I need 6 weeks and a dress. Emily didn't ask why. She already knew. She had watched me rise from the wreckage, inch by inch. She heard the rasp in my voice turn into steel. She saw my shoulders square again, my spine stiffen with purpose. She just said, "Tell me what you need." The first thing I needed was a designer who wouldn't flinch at scars. Enter Callie Tran. A Vietnamese-American designer known for dressing cancer survivors in gowns that didn't hide the damage, but honored it. I reached out, sent her my story in a simple email, no theatrics, no pity fishing. Just the truth. I didn't expect her to respond so quickly. But she called that same night. Her voice was calm, even gentle. "What kind of dress do you want, Olga?" "One that speaks without me opening my mouth." She was silent for a beat. Then said, "Come in tomorrow. I already have a vision." Her studio smelled like jasmine and thread glue. Swatches of fabric hung like prayer flags from a line across the room. She sketched as I spoke. And within 20 minutes, I saw it, an emerald green gown, low back, soft satin finish, modest neckline. It didn't scream for attention, it exhaled strength. "The color of rebirth," Callie murmured. "Spring after your longest winter." I nodded, tears welling but never falling. The next few weeks were a blur. My health was stable by then, my final rounds of chemo had ended, and while radiation still lingered ahead, I was clear enough to plan. I scheduled fittings. I arranged makeup with a former theater artist named June, a magician who made cheekbones rise where none existed and saw beauty in shadows. And the final piece, the USB. Every email, every receipt, every time-stamped transaction Jason had tried to sweep under the rug, it was all there. I worked with Daniel Hart, Jason's former friend turned my unexpected ally. Daniel had kept records from the internal fraud Jason tried to pin on him 2 years ago. Now we had matching dots to connect. The embezzlement wasn't small. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. A quiet siphoning of money from investor accounts, routed through shell events, re-entered as strategic promotion. Daniel didn't flinch when I asked him to stand beside me. "You sure?" I asked. I stood by once while he stepped on others. I'm not making that mistake again. 6 weeks later, I checked into the Atoria Edge Hotel. 1 floor above the grand ballroom, where Jason and Lindsay would say I do beneath the same chandelier I once picked out from a catalog. I ran my fingers over the soft ridges of my dress, laid across the bed like it was waiting to be activated. And then I looked in the mirror. My hair had returned in uneven curls. My cheeks were fuller now, less sunken. The surgical scar along my rib was barely visible, but I saw it. I remembered it. I honored it. Around my neck, I clasped the phoenix pendant. A silver charm Emily had given me the day I finished chemo. I wore it like armor. When I stepped into the elevator, time felt like it stilled. The moment the ballroom doors opened, everything slowed. The music didn't skip. The laughter didn't halt. But the air shifted. I felt it before I saw it, every head turning, every voice dipping into silence. I walked in alone. And I saw him. Jason. His tux was perfect. His hair slicked back with precision. But his face? Pale. Like someone had just whispered the word ghost in his ear. Lindsay, ever the actress, held her champagne flute with grace, but her smile trembled as soon as she saw me. My heels clicked on marble. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just steady. I reached the center of the room. The band faltered. The guests leaned in. Jason stepped forward, his lips parting like he was about to say something diplomatic. Maybe a lie. Maybe a command. I beat him to it. Jason Miller, I said, voice clear. I believe you forgot to invite someone. Silence. He moved toward me, hand out, eyes scanning the room, as if trying to figure out how to spin this. Olga, he said tightly. This isn't the place. Oh, I think it's exactly the place. I pulled the USB from my clutch. Held it up like a holy relic. I thought it might be useful to share what you've been doing with company funds. See, it's all here. And don't worry, your investors will get a copy too. The room exploded with murmurs. I turned, just as Daniel stepped through the rear entrance like a scene from a courtroom drama. In his hand, a leather briefcase. He strode over to a silver-haired man near the wine bar. Bernard? Jason's board member, correct? I believe you'll want to review this. Jason lunged forward. You're ruining everything. No, I said, voice steady. You did that yourself. I'm just the survivor, finally telling the truth. I turned and walked away. No screaming. No drama. Just the weight of truth settling like dust. And behind me? Dead silence. When I stepped out of the ballroom, the doors didn't slam, they whispered shut behind me. But inside, I knew a storm had erupted. Jason's career, the wedding, his precious image, it all began to collapse the moment I handed over that USB. Emily was waiting for me at the end of the hallway, holding my coat and a pair of flats like a silent sentry. She didn't speak. She just wrapped me in the coat and placed a hand on my back. We walked through the hotel lobby like it was any ordinary evening. The chandelier lights glimmered above us, reflecting off polished tile. I had never felt so grounded, so completely inside my own body. We stepped into the chilly Seattle night, and I inhaled deeply. The scent of lake water, cedar trees, and a life freshly reclaimed. I wasn't just the girl he left during chemo anymore. I was the woman who walked into the hall he stole from me, and took everything back. The next morning, the fallout began. It started with a flurry of calls to Daniel. Bernard, the board member, had called an emergency meeting. Jason hadn't even made it back from the honeymoon suite. In fact, I'm not sure he ever got there. According to a source close to the hotel staff, Jason and Lindsay didn't even stay the night. She was gone by sunrise. By Monday morning, the Seattle Ledger ran a front-page article. Young investment director suspended amid embezzlement probe. Jason's mugshot wasn't one of those formal, clean LinkedIn-style photos. It was a candid snap, taken from a distance, as he exited company headquarters looking disheveled, like a man who hadn't slept in days. His tie was loose. His eyes bloodshot. His life unraveling at the seams. An internal audit was opened within hours. The numbers on my USB weren't the end, they were just the beginning. Once the forensic accountants dug in, they found over $2 million in suspicious funds routed through temporary disbursement accounts. The shell company in Nevada was real. The media expenses were fabricated. The events and dinners? Ghost entries, backed up with real receipts from Jason and Lindsay's romantic getaways. 4 weeks later, Jason was officially suspended. The case had expanded into a federal investigation. And me? I was sipping peppermint tea in my Capitol Hill apartment, watching the cherry blossoms outside sway in the wind. I didn't need to do anything else. The truth was already moving like wildfire. When the arrest finally came, it was quiet. No press, no cameras. Just a Monday morning visit to the luxury apartment Jason had rented for mental clarity with Lindsay. They found him in sweatpants. No shoes. Handcuffed and silent. I got the news via a text from Daniel. He's in custody. It's done. I read it 3 times. Then put my phone down and stared at the sunlight spilling across my kitchen counter. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just breathed. It was over. Well, almost. At the first court hearing, Jason pled guilty. No flashy attorneys. No desperate denials. Just a quiet admission of guilt, as the prosecution laid out the timeline I had started. The judge ordered 18 months in federal custody, full restitution of funds, and additional civil damages. The courtroom was silent, save for the clicking of keyboards. I wasn't there in person. I watched the live stream from a coffee shop on Pine Street. Sitting beside me? Daniel. Silent. Present. Steady. When the sentence was announced, he didn't say congratulations. He didn't need to. His hand simply rested gently over mine. I think it was the first time in years someone touched me without needing anything, without pity, without apology, without expectation. Just presence. And Lindsay? She vanished. Every social media account deactivated. LinkedIn wiped clean. Her former firm issued a curt one-sentence press release. Ms. Lindsay Parker has resigned for personal reasons. I heard whispers. That she'd moved to Colorado. That she was living with family. That she was applying to law school again, like nothing had ever happened. But I didn't care. Her absence was enough. Let her carry the weight of what she stood next to. Let her sleep beside silence and remember the night I walked into her fantasy in my survivor dress. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I nearly ignored it. But something, curiosity, intuition, maybe grace, made me answer. Olga, the voice rasped. It's Judith. Jason's mother. I stood still. She took a shaky breath. I'm not calling to defend him. I just wanted you to know I watched it all. Every frame. You didn't do it to hurt him. You did it to survive. And to tell the truth. Thank you for not letting the truth stay buried. There was a long silence on the line. And then, so quietly I nearly missed it, she whispered. I used to think Jason was strong. But it was you. It was always you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you for saying that. She never called again. But she didn't need to. Sometimes, a single honest word can close a chapter you thought might stay open forever. As for me? I moved on. But not in the cliché way. I didn't suddenly fall in love. I didn't wake up with $1 million company or a book deal. I just started living my life again. Slowly. Honestly. Fully. I still wore the Phoenix pendant. Not as a trophy, but as a promise. That I would never let anyone else define my worth again. By the time summer came around, Seattle felt different, warmer, softer, lighter. Or maybe it wasn't the city. Maybe it was me. I had moved into a small apartment in Capitol Hill with wood floors that creaked and a window that caught the sunrise just right. I filled it with second-hand furniture and thrifted joy, a navy velvet armchair, a chipped ceramic mug that fit perfectly in my palm, a small rug that smelled faintly of lavender. For the first time in a long time, nothing I owned reminded me of Jason. And that was the point. Each morning, I took long walks through Volunteer Park, watching the world move without me having to control it. No deadlines. No drama. Just life, happening. And in that quiet, I began to write. Not about Jason. Not about betrayal. Not even about the cancer, really. But about survival. About how sometimes, healing isn't dramatic. It's brushing your hair without sobbing. It's buying groceries without someone's voice echoing in your head. It's laughing and realizing you didn't feel guilty for it. I called the manuscript Among the Ashes. It wasn't a tell-all. It wasn't a revenge piece. It was a whisper to anyone who had ever been left behind in their darkest moment, you're still here. You still matter. You still get to choose what happens next. Daniel was the first person I let read it. We had become friends, something steady and quiet. We'd meet on Saturdays for coffee or browse used bookstores where we'd spend an hour reading in silence and never once feel awkward. He never asked about my treatment. He never asked if I was okay. He simply existed next to me in a way that didn't require performance. The day I handed him the manuscript, he didn't say a word. He just took it, nodded once, and promised to read it slowly. 2 weeks later, he handed me a cup of peach iced tea in Gasworks Park and said, I didn't know you wrote like that. I didn't either, I said. It's not just beautiful. It's brave. And I believed him. A month later, the book was released by a small independent publisher in Portland. No fanfare. No press tour. But the emails started trickling in. A teacher in Ohio. A mother in New Mexico. A student in Toronto. One woman named Claire wrote from a hospital bed in Ohio. Your story made me stop just in time. My husband left during my first round of treatment. I thought I wasn't strong enough to go on. But now I think I'll try. I read her message 3 times, tears sliding down my cheeks, not out of grief, but gratitude. That I had reached someone. That something born from my worst pain had turned into a lifeline for someone else. And then, one crisp fall morning, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. The postmark read, Federal Correctional Facility, Sheridan, Oregon. I stared at it for several minutes. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a folded letter on lined paper. No threats. No apologies. Just shaky handwriting I recognized instantly. Olga. I always chased admiration and power, thinking if I had enough of it, I wouldn't feel hollow. But it was all a shell. It took me losing everything to realize I had already thrown away the one person who saw me beyond my ambition. When you walked into that wedding hall, I didn't see revenge. I saw someone I didn't deserve. I saw clarity. I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I don't expect it. But I needed to say it, you survived. You became more than I ever imagined. And I hope you found yourself again. Jason. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not because I missed him. Not because I cared. But because I needed the reminder. Even the man who broke me couldn't deny who I had become. That winter, Daniel and I hiked Rattlesnake Ledge on my 28th birthday. The view was clear that day, the whole valley stretched beneath us like a promise, the air sharp and clean. We brought sandwiches, water, and one blanket. Sat on the edge in silence, watching the wind sweep through the pine trees. Daniel asked, "What are you thinking?" I touched the phoenix pendant at my neck. That I don't need anything more to feel whole. He smiled. Didn't say a word. And we sat there, no future to race toward, no past to run from. Just the present. Breath. Sky. Stillness. Enough. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you've already lost everything once. It teaches you not to fear the fall. You've already survived it. In the months after Jason's sentencing, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I stopped looking over my shoulder or bracing for betrayal. Instead, I just lived. I took on more freelance editing work. Word got around in the children's publishing world, Olga Reyes had a sharp eye and a gentle touch. Authors loved my feedback. One even called me a surgeon with a poet's hand. I cried when I read that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing validation. I was just doing good work and letting it speak for itself. I also started giving back. Quietly. I donated part of the book proceeds to a local foundation that helped young women with cancer afford treatment-related housing costs. I never attached my name. I didn't want the attention. Just the impact. Emily, my lighthouse through the darkest nights, moved into a bigger apartment with her fiancé. She still checked on me every Sunday, still brought over soup when she thought I looked a little pale, and still reminded me who I was on the days I started to forget. And Daniel? Daniel became a constant. We never labeled it. He'd knock on my door some evenings with 2 lattes and a used book from a sidewalk sale. We'd cook pasta, talk about absolutely nothing, or sit in silence listening to Miles Davis while the rain tapped against the windows. Once, while walking through Pike Place Market, I spotted an old man playing a battered cello. I froze in the crowd, the sound wrapping around me like an embrace I hadn't known I needed. Daniel didn't ask why I stopped. He just stood next to me, eyes closed, and let me feel it. That's what I loved about him, he didn't demand a story. He just created space for one to unfold. It was a random Wednesday when the idea came. I was organizing my files when I found the folder marked A&V Atoria. Inside were old invoices from the venue Jason and I had once booked, back when love still felt like a promise. And there it was, my name, printed neatly next to primary reservation holder. He had never taken me off the contract. A wild thought bloomed in my mind like a firework. I could sue. Legally, I had grounds. The deposit had been made in my name, from my account, months before we separated. And yet, Jason used the same venue, same vendor contracts, even the same damn florist I had chosen, to marry someone else. The pettier part of me thought, let's drag him into one last courtroom. But then something else rose up, exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones when you've already won. And I realized, I didn't need to win again. I didn't need another headline or another blow to his already crumbling life. I didn't need revenge. Because I already had everything he never gave me, peace, purpose, and people who truly loved me. Still, I made one call. To Callie, my dress designer. Do you keep archives of your work? I asked. For my private pieces, yes, she replied. Why? I want a print. Of the sketch. The green gown? Yes. The one I wore to walk into the fire. She sent it 2 days later, beautifully framed, signed in the bottom corner. For Olga, who didn't survive to be seen, but to see. I hung it above my desk. That same week, I received another letter. Not from Jason. Not from Lindsay. From someone I'd almost forgotten. Judith. She had found a copy of Among the Ashes at a bookstore in Portland and recognized the name. Her note was handwritten, every loop and stroke careful, almost reverent. Olga. I finished your book in one sitting. I had to. Every sentence felt like it was trying to breathe for someone who couldn't. I wish I could say more than I'm sorry. But those words feel so thin now. You didn't just survive, you became something rare, clear. I hope you never doubt that you are the kind of woman my son never deserved. But I am so deeply grateful the world still gets to know you. Judith. I wept for her. Not for her son. Not for the past. But for the woman who had watched her family unravel and still had the courage to reach across time and say something true. I folded her letter and placed it next to Claire's email from Ohio. My tiny collection of proof that healing doesn't stop at your own skin, it ripples outward. That weekend, Daniel and I went to an art installation downtown. The final room was filled with floating glass birds suspended from the ceiling. Dozens of them, transparent, glowing, motionless in the light. Daniel looked up and said, "You ever think about how fragile things survive storms better than the strong ones?" I stared at those birds for a long time. "Yeah," I whispered. "Because they don't resist the wind. They just let it carry them somewhere new." Winter passed quietly, as if even the weather knew I needed rest. There were no dramatic milestones, no sudden revelations, just the quiet rhythm of healing. I read more. I wrote less. I took long walks and didn't check my phone as much. The stillness became sacred. And Daniel remained, like the constant tide. Always nearby, never overbearing. He showed up with new vinyl records, old poetry books, and hot pho on rainy nights. Not once did he ask me to define what we were. He didn't need a label to stay. One evening, while we watched the snowfall from my apartment window, he turned to me and said, "You know what I admire most about you?" I glanced at him, half smiling. "What?" "You didn't let bitterness make a home inside you." I looked away, blinking slowly. That truth landed harder than I expected. Because it had tried. There were nights when I wanted to send Jason's mugshot to every contact in my phone. There were days when I dreamt of showing up to Lindsay's new job, if she even had one, and reading her the letter I never wrote. But I didn't. Because I knew something they didn't: justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And peace is its loudest victory. The publishing house that had printed Among the Ashes emailed me in early spring. The book had quietly gone into a second printing. No fanfare, no bestseller lists. But it had legs. Word of mouth was strong. Survivors were sharing it. Book clubs were recommending it. Counselors were ordering copies for their patients. The editor's note was short. "You've made more than a mark. You've made a path." One morning, I received a message from a woman named Priya, a psychologist in New Jersey. She ran a support group for women recovering from relational trauma during serious illness. She asked if I'd be willing to Zoom in as a guest speaker, just for 15 minutes. No pressure. I almost said no. But then I remembered the women who sat beside me in infusion rooms, hollow-eyed and terrified. The ones who never had someone to talk to, never got to tell their story, because they didn't survive long enough to. I said yes. The call was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. When the screen blinked to life, 12 faces filled the monitor, some pale and bald, some thin and trembling, some younger than I expected. One woman wore a scarf over her head and smiled like it hurt. I introduced myself. Just by my first name. Just as someone who had been there. And I told them the story, not the one about Jason or the betrayal or the wedding. But the one about the moment I stood up off the bathroom floor and decided to keep breathing. One woman, maybe in her 60s, began to cry silently. She unmuted herself and whispered, "I thought I was alone. But hearing you, I think I might be able to try again." After the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. Daniel knocked gently on my door a few hours later. I didn't even have to explain. He just opened a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses, and sat with me on the couch. "I think this is what I'm meant to do," I said quietly. "Help people? No. Be seen by the right people. And help them see themselves too." He nodded slowly. You're not just surviving anymore. You're building. I smiled. For the first time, I'm not building around someone. I'm building for me. By April, I had been invited to speak at a small women's conference in San Francisco, an event centered around resilience, transformation, and recovery. I wore a navy jumpsuit with silver earrings Judith had once gifted me, and I stood before a crowd of strangers, telling them that rebirth isn't always loud. That sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply keep going when we don't know how. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe 23, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're Olga," she said. "The Olga." I blinked. "I guess so." She clutched her copy of Among the Ashes to her chest. "Your story saved me." I smiled, touched her arm gently, and said, "No. You saved you. I just lit a match. You kept it burning." As the conference wrapped, I found a quiet corner to check my email. There was a new message. Short subject line, Phoenix. It was from Callie Tran. Inside was a photo. She had just completed a new line of survivor gowns inspired by women who had written to her after reading my story. The final gown in the collection? The Olga, an emerald green masterpiece with subtle silver stitching in the shape of rising flames. I closed my laptop slowly, overwhelmed. My pain had become someone else's courage. My ashes had become someone else's spark. The morning I received the final copy of Among the Ashes, the third edition, now with a foreword written by a breast cancer survivor turned senator, I sat on the steps outside my apartment, the city humming around me, and cried. Not out of grief. Not even out of joy. But out of release. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel haunted by the girl who had been abandoned on the bathroom floor. I had mourned her, held her, rebuilt her. And now, I could finally let her go. A few weeks later, Daniel and I went on a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. We stayed in a cozy inn by the water where the only sounds at night were the waves and the distant call of loons. One morning, we woke early and climbed a quiet ridge trail that overlooked the sea. At the top, the wind danced through my hair, now longer, fuller, curling naturally the way it never had before chemo. I stood at the cliff's edge, breathing it all in. Daniel stood beside me, sipping his coffee from a thermos. You ever think about what would have happened if Jason hadn't left? He asked softly. I smiled. I used to. Every day. But now? I think I would have stayed small. I would have survived cancer, but not myself. Daniel nodded. And now? Now I know I was never meant to stay small. He looked at me, eyes kind. I'm glad you know that. Then, quietly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Not a ring box, something different. He opened it slowly, revealing a delicate chain with a new pendant, a miniature golden book engraved with the words still rising on one side. Inside was a folded quote. From my book. You are not what broke you. You are what rebuilt. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't break down. Not this time. I fastened the necklace around my neck, right beside my silver phoenix. One for where I came from. The other for who I had become. Later that summer, I received a second letter from Jason. No return address again. No apology. Just a brief update. I've been working in the prison library. Started writing. Nothing good yet, but it's something. I think about that wedding every night. The way you walked in, alive, radiant. You didn't have to speak. You made the whole room listen anyway. I deserve the fallout. But I hope you found something better than justice. I hope you found peace. I didn't write back. There was nothing more to say. But I placed the letter in the same drawer as the first, next to Judith's card, Claire's email, and a dozen other notes from women I'd never met but now carried in my heart. Somewhere along the way, my story had stopped being just mine. And maybe that's what healing really is, Not just mending what's broken, but using the cracks to let others in. To help them see light too. Daniel and I never rushed things. We never labeled it. But by fall, I knew. He was home. Not because he completed me, but because he honored every piece I had already put back together on my own. He once told me, "You're not brave because you fought cancer. You're brave because you came back from betrayal with your dignity intact." And I believed him. I wore my green survivor dress again once. At a small fundraiser for women's health in downtown Seattle. This time, the spotlight didn't feel terrifying. It felt earned. People clapped. I smiled. Not for recognition. But for the woman I had fought so hard to become. A woman who no longer apologized for taking up space. A woman who no longer whispered her truth. A woman who walked into a wedding hall not to ruin someone else's day, but to reclaim her own story. Because this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about rebirth. About what happens when you're left for dead, but rise anyway. So if you're reading this, or watching this, and you're in the middle of your storm, know this. You are not invisible. You are not unworthy. You are not too broken. And your story isn't over. Not even close. Thank you for watching Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your voice. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories about love, loss, and finding your way back.